Before we go on with the rest of this entire channel, this first video is like a gateway video, which will let you know if this idea of advanced artist training that applies to every single art form, whether that type of training is really going to help you or not. All the rest of this channel is based on the conclusions of this video. And if you want to just get to the conclusion part quickly, it will be around here on this timestamp. All right. This video is all about artistic motive, the reason for creating an artwork. The only time you really hear about this in kind of everyday language is the really simplified comparison between doing it for love or doing it for money. And you might hear terms like someone becoming a sellout, which basically means they've turned to the money instead of the passion. But this is just all way too simplified. In 2023, I wrote a book called True Love and Art. And in one of the first few chapters, I discussed all the different motives for creating an artwork. Well, as many as I could think of, at least. So we'll use that chapter from the book to look at these, all these different motives, just briefly go over each one. And then we'll be choosing out of this list what motives we really want to base the idea of an advanced artist training on. And the idea is, if you feel that you identify with those motives, if you're genuinely excited about them, interested in them, then all the rest of this channel and this type of training will be for you. So let's start with them. First one is the performer to come alive with an audience. You can think of even as little kids, some kids just absolutely love putting on like a show for their family, like a dance routine or something. There are people who come alive in performance. The attention seeker, with the performer, they genuinely come alive, and the audience's reaction brings out of them even more of the performance. So it kind of both things work together, right? An attention seeker just purely wants the attention. Any attention is good attention. Think of things like the paparazzi or clickbait. It's just purely about the attention. Maybe another way to say it is it's all about me, not the show of all the performance. Next one is high talent, low desire. All this means is that somebody's talent, something they're naturally, effortlessly good at, can take them down easier roads, which they don't necessarily have any desire to go down. The next one, the competitor. Apparently, I never went to art school, but I've heard people who did go, and when it gets to the final year projects, it can all get very competitive and, a bit catty and all this stuff. There's a TV show out at the moment called Sarah Maple's Nazi Sexy Shark Show. And it's a comedy about being an artist and some of the ridiculous things you run into. And there's one episode, I think it's the first episode, where she bumps into an old classmate and the whole exchange is quite snide, catty remarks and stuff like that. So the motive is all about being the best, beating other people. You're driven by the becoming number one, the refugee. Get me out of this 9-to-5 job. This motive is really pushed by not being able to stand the job. And then you might see making art as a way out of that. But really, the motive is not liking something and wanting the exit door from that, with art just providing that exit door. Right? Moving on from the refugee, maybe not only do you want to get out of the 9-to-5 job, but then you get greedy and you want to become wealthy from making art, to sell a painting for millions of pounds, get stinking rich. This is obviously the same problem as people playing the lottery thinking it's going to change everything about their life. Most cases of people who win the lottery, it actually damages their life more. I mean, this is kind of the motive of the era, isn't it? It's just people want to become rich and wealthy. And not just the wealth, but also the status that can come along with success, really. I think of this in terms of being back at school, and there was always a popular group of kids, and being in with the popular kids just gave this, I don't know, like this buzz of almost like glamour, just kind of a good feeling from being in with the cool kids. And when you get to the adult level, you get things like Hollywood and being involved in these clubs. But whether it's wealthy or just I'm an artist and that's who I am, a lot of the motive can be that you use this as a badge of who you are, a stable identity. So that's identity, imitation. This can happen and does happen in teenage years because you don't really know the full range of options. And so when you see something that stands out and you think, yeah, that's me, that's something I want to be involved in, being in a band or something, you will start playing that music, dressing the same, everything. Whether that's really you or not, you will imitate the best thing, the best model you can find at the time. And that can be good as a foot in the door for something. But if you keep trying to just run on that as your motive, obviously it doesn't work in the end. Freedom, millions of possibilities. What I mean by that is if you think about painting and all the different color combinations, which are almost infinite, music, all the different chord progressions, sculpture, all the different gestures, every art form has a palette that has almost infinite possibilities in it. The analogy I would give is if you're a kid at school and you're bored in the classroom and it's all sat down and still, when the bell goes and you're allowed to just run around this massive open space playground, you can feel the sense of like relief from the restrictions. So for me, when we were going to make our own songs, it felt like that, just being able to run around a massive playground. That's what it felt like. So the motive is that feeling of freedom in itself. The next one is emotional release. Trust in privacy, not people. If you struggle to trust people or you don't feel like you can talk to a family member or something, the most common version of this is having a diary. The diary is a blank canvas that's private. So that canvas won't judge you. It lets you pour what you need to pour. And with it being that non judgmental, that allows for this release. Whereas if you were talking to a person, you might still guard the running of that emotion. Distraction from worry, illness. There was a massive rise in popularity of meditation coloring books in like the past 4 or 5 years. And the idea of a meditation coloring book is you can just that motion of coloring something in takes you out of any worries or it distracts you basically. Making an artwork, making a painting, these can just provide distractions from worry, illness, things you don't want to think about. The explorer slash discovery, buried treasure and adventure. This relates a little bit to the freedom one. So you've got this massive field to run around, but there's also the idea that somewhere in that infinite possibility, there are actually treasures and things to discover. So if you think of like metal detectorists, they've got a massive field and they can choose anywhere they want to start looking. But the idea is that they might find some kind of treasure, something valuable. Revelation, new experiences, catharsis, clarity, and new lands. What I mean by this is that, okay, so we know you can discover something, there's possible treasure there. Some of that treasure actually relates to your own life, your own perspective. If you think about maybe you go to speak with a friend, you've got a problem and you ask for their perspective and they're really good at giving you some advice. And then your conversation with them helps to bring you out into a completely new perspective of the problem. That's one type of revelation, release from confusion. For me, writing the book True Love and Art, that whole book came from being confused. And by the time I'd finished writing it, I came to a completely new perspective that I didn't have before writing it. Completely new, which is something I'll touch on later. Um, but yeah, these revelations are new places to see your own situation from, or just completely new places, like a new experience. I guess the word is never seen before. And then the last one I've put as experience sharing interpretation. Let's say you've had a day where you've had some kind of experience and you have a friend, you can't wait to tell your friend about this experience. There's a feeling of, I can't wait to tell them. That's where this kind of starts. You know something about that experience was worth sharing. Interpretation is deeper than that. Interpretation comes in when you know you've had some kind of experience worth sharing, but words alone, just conversation, doesn't seem to be enough to get across the experience. That's when you might turn to music or paint, something that helps you interpret or amplify communicating that experience. So, where experience sharing is, I've got something to say, can't wait to tell you. Interpretation is, I don't even know how to say this, but I've got to find a way of saying it. It's more like that. And that's the full list there. Obviously, there's probably more than this, but this is as many as I could think of at the time. Now it's a case of choosing some of these motives based on some questions. What we're really trying to understand here is two things. The first one, which of these, all these motives, are unique to creating artwork? And then secondly, which of these motives apply to every single art form? Right. So there's two conditions. And I know this has been going on for a while now, so not much further to go. Let me just grab the pen here. Right. So first of all, attention seeking, high talent, being competitive, trying to escape a 9 to 5 job, wealth, status, imitation, and distraction. All of these things are not even specific to art. In other words, getting attention, being competitive, and so on can all be related to other things in society. They don't have to have anything to do with art. You can become wealthy another way, you can get status another way, right? So it's easy to get rid of those ones first. The second condition of which of these motives apply to every single art form, this gets rid of the audience coming alive of an audience. Not every single art form deals with an audience in a live situation. Identity is a really important one that we're going to come back to. This is sort of the whole point of this video, really. And the thing to say at this point is understanding our motives better helps us understand our identity as an artist better. So I'll come back to that later. And we already said before that freedom, running around the playground, there's so many ways in life to achieve that release from restrictions, right? So freedom isn't unique to creating artwork. Likewise, the release of emotions. Some people get this when they watch a film, not creating a film. So we can't say that emotional release is truly unique to creating artwork. Exploring, discovery, revelations, new experiences can obviously all be found in other places outside of creating artwork. So again, that can be crossed off. And we do find ways of sharing experiences, mainly in conversation, but we are able to share our experiences through talking mainly. But experience interpretation, I probably need to find a better word than interpretation, but to go over the meaning again, when you have an experience and you can't find a way to speak about it, but you feel like it's possible to do that, what actually happens is it's only because of these palettes that have almost infinite possibilities that we are actually able to find new ways and interpret experiences. So out of the whole list, experience interpretation is the only activity that is unique to creating artwork and applies to every single art form. In every art form, we can use the palettes of that art form to find new ways of interpreting experiences. So this becomes our foundational block. The next thing to consider is we already said briefly that the millions of possibilities from these broader palettes of language, paint, sound, acting, these palettes are exactly what enable this to take place. So, another question we need to ask is which of the other motives cannot be left out of this foundational block? So, we know that freedom, the millions of possibilities, that's going to be in there. And because we're talking about experience interpretation, the inner world of human experiences, basically, obviously emotion forms a huge part of that. It's not the whole story, but it becomes impossible to talk about experiences without talking about emotion. Next, the idea of revelation and never been seen before is obviously completely related to the idea of finding a new way to say something. We could even say that in finding a new way to speak an experience, that actually gives us a new experience itself. That gets very complicated, but just to say for now, it's very related. And obviously, exploring and discovery is part of that. I'm not sure what performer's doing on this slide because it weren't supposed to be, but just ignore that. That just leaves experience sharing. Whether you want to share what you discover through your experience interpretation is up to the individual. But we're just going to assume that this basically doesn't matter either way. Okay, so these make up the blocks, the motives that cannot be left out of this foundational block. All right. So now we have this ultimate foundational block, which is completely unique to creating artwork and applies to every single art form. And then we have these other blocks which can't really be left out of this foundation. But the thing is, it's still possible to be operating in these areas of motive without ever really touching experience interpretation. And what this really comes down to is who you really are as an artist. How do you know if experience interpretation is something that's important to you? I saw an advert the other day for a music program where you just press a button and it will generate all these chord progressions for you. Basically, you keep pressing that button, you've got an unlimited toolbox to play around with forever. But that doesn't say anything about whether you as an artist want to cross this line of using these palettes in order to be able to interpret experiences and speak experiences in a new way. I'll give an example. I was talking to a group of students and there was one girl who was her drawings were absolutely unbelievably good. She's amazing at her ability to command the language of drawing. But what she said was she kept hitting a wall when it came to her using her command of her language of drawing to express an experience. She felt very uncomfortable on this line. It was almost as if she was a master in this area, but when it came to this area, it was like becoming a toddler again. And to me, this isn't surprising because in all of our art schools, the there is no real form of training for crossing this line. In a way, crossing this line involves becoming aware of the entire inner landscape of human experience. Just for a start, the whole range of emotions we have. Not many people are familiar or aware of 50 emotions. It's more like three or four. And that includes artists as well. And that's because this inner landscape of experience isn't trained in any way in artists. It's kind of left as a just get on with it yourself. And yet, what we're saying is this experience interpretation ability is completely unique to creating artwork. In other words, it's one of the most special abilities that artists actually possess. But you have to understand that as a motive, this playing with the palettes is a completely different motive to using the palettes to express an experience. So, as people, the identity of this person is different to the identity of this person. So, finally, we come to the conclusion of this video, which is, are you this type of artist? Is this your identity? Does crossing this line actually matter to you? And the only way to find that out is to ask more questions. This is where the quiz comes in. We're going to do a brief version of the quiz now, but I will attach a more in-depth quiz to the video description. So if after this you really still don't know if this matters to you, you can try out that quiz and see what answers you get. Right, so I guess these questions are really to try to probe where you are in these blocks. That's the idea anyway. I'm not claiming to be a complete professional at making questionnaires or anything like that. Well, hopefully there's enough here to go on. Do you feel a sense of excitement or coming alive with the millions of possibilities from art form palettes? How do you spell art form? I might have spelled that wrong. But yeah, you know what I mean. When you really, what I'm getting at with this is there are some people who are happy to cover other people's songs, and then there's other people who get excited at all the original possibilities in those palettes. So, do you feel a sense of excitement? If the answer to that is no, then that could suggest that you're operating in these other motives somewhere in there. But there is a real definite feeling of this sort of sense of excitement for people who feel excited by all the possibilities those palettes have. So if it's yes, move on to the next question. People can be excited about exploring these infinite palettes, as I keep calling them. But sometimes all they want to do is explore the aesthetics of them themselves. As I explained earlier with that computer program, you could spend forever just being stimulated by all the different sounds, just just the sounds themselves or the colors themselves. You know, you take some kind of joy out of just that, and really that comes under a motive I haven't really stated here. But if you think of it as like a hobby where the motive is the joy of just playing with, you know, these colors and everything, it's perhaps related. Sort of the distraction is the sort of shadow side, if you like. The light side of that would be genuine joy, you know, actual pleasure out of just playing with the infinite palettes. So if your answer to that is yes, then you stay here basically, and you're happy with this freedom and this exploring. It's all quite playful. If you have a sense that there's something a bit more going on than just that, then it goes a bit deeper. One indication that you might be have a different identity to just playing with palettes is that you actually have a natural curiosity about the inner experience world, you know, emotion states, what it feels like to have certain experiences. And obviously, there can be people who are attracted to this that have nothing to do with all the rest of the things we've highlighted. But the mixture of this playing with the palettes and being naturally drawn towards inner human experiences is a sign of going a bit deeper. So if it's yes, you go down a bit further. Do you feel a sense of possibility when imagining an experience being interpreted into these palettes? It's really hard to explain what this feeling is, but it's something about you can feel a link between an experience and these palettes. So your natural curiosity of the inner world of experiences mixes with your excitement at the palette possibilities. There are people who can feel this link, but they are very much stuck, like the girl I mentioned earlier in the group of artists who couldn't really cross that line. It's probably true that there are people who really don't feel comfortable crossing that line, and that's fine. But remember, we're trying to make an artist training for that particular motive. So we are looking for people who naturally they don't feel uncomfortable about crossing that line. It's strange because I grew up with songwriting as my first art form. Because songwriting involves music and lyrics, it almost forces you to train this thing at the same time. You want to sit down and write a song, but you really don't have anything to write about. So you can feel this tension almost immediately when you start songwriting. It's probably true that songwriters train their ability between these two aspects more quickly than in other art forms, probably. But I suppose a sign of this would be that if you felt like you didn't have any experience worth going into, you probably would leave the palette alone. That tends to be what happens. You might find yourself saying things like, I've got nothing worth making something about, which is a sentence nobody's ever said. Um, how would that be said? I don't know what to make it about. That's what you'd probably say. I want to write a song, but I don't know what to write about. And when you feel that tension, it stops you. It literally is not like you're just going to go off and you might go off and play around with the guitar a little bit, but you won't make anything. It will just be kind of playing, and that's it. And at this point, I want to come over here to the dedication level kind of questions. Some people, you get down to here, some people will just leave this up to chance. Oh, I can't think of anything to write a song about. I'll leave it. And then there are people who will actively start trying to go after a, multiple attempts at trying to express something. And it will probably be awful to begin with because that's how it goes. But if you miss the attempt, there's a tendency to keep trying until you do get closer to it. This is another sign that you are this type of experience interpretation artist. And if you get more comfortable at that, you will even get to a stage of you're willing to change the techniques you most commonly use just to improve getting closer to that interpretation. Essentially, what happens is the interpretation takes charge, it becomes the most important thing. So you will do anything completely outside of your own ego to improve getting closer to it. I think for this advanced artist training, it's probably right for people who feel this tension between experience and the palettes, and that they have multiple attempts at trying to interpret the same experience. They don't just leave it up to chance. That's a good starting point, I would say. And I've left this other one till last because I don't think it's completely essential, but I do think it's a bonus if you are somewhat at ease with feeling emotions. I don't know if you've ever been around some people who are comedians are very much like this. They do not want to go anywhere near a genuine emotion other than kind of anger in a way. But I'm leaving this as a kind of bonus one because you can use imagination of emotions other than feeling them. I think you can still do good work in that. For example, if I can find the slide, the major tool for this advanced artist training is this emotion wheel. It's not about feeling these emotions, but it is about having an awareness of these emotions. That starts to paint the entire inner landscape of human experiences. This is really what should be taught to artists on day one. If we're saying that experience interpretation is a foundational part of every single art form, then to my mind, this inner landscape is the place to start. How can we become advanced artists if we don't have good awareness of this inner landscape? But I just want to emphasize it's not about feeling the emotions. Imagining the world of that emotion is enough. And it's a hell of a step forward from where artist training is at the moment. But if you don't feel any natural attraction to this inner landscape type work, then obviously the whole rest of this channel and training probably aren't for you. And that's fine. I just wanted to make a place that was dedicated to this because for me, this was completely missing from my training. And really I've been forced to create this because I just think it's wrong that this is missing. So that brings us finally to the identity motive. The reason I've left this one till last has a lot to do with all of these ulterior motives, if you like. Because art is so open to everything, all of these motives have been allowed to become completely tangled up. The major problem with that, which I cover in the book, is that when we're completely unclear about the motives, we end up operating alongside people who we think are the same as us, but actually what they're doing isn't related to what we're doing. There is a lot of isolation and loneliness in the life pursuit of becoming an artist. That loneliness factor actually makes us vulnerable to ulterior motives, much more vulnerable to them. If we have a motive that's clear and a community around that motive, we can focus on the highest ambitions for art without these other motives interfering with that. My entire story, if you like, is that I always had the highest ambitions for what art was capable in itself. I took that very seriously, as you can see from all these slides. But it was very hard to find somewhere that took experience interpretation seriously. But that mixture of having this respect, honor, real high regard for the ambition of what art can do, having that and not being interested in status or attention and all these other things puts you in a very strange land. And I really don't see why there's any need for that to be the case. If we get our motives straight and we foster a type of training for this particular motive, which I believe holds the highest ambition for what art is capable of, if we do that, it should allow other people to identify with the value of what they really are in itself without all these other things. It's something like this: the clearer the motive, the stronger the camaraderie and identity in itself. And that provides protection against ulterior motives, which these isolated artists are very vulnerable to because of their isolated state. Nothing really recognizes their capability. And the ones I really feel sorry for the most are the isolated, ambitious artists. They're the ones I feel sorry for. Being able to protect the camaraderie between artists who have the ambition of experience interpretation, that's really my main focus. And it was important to get the motives clear about that first. But I'm guessing you have an idea of if this is you or not. If this isn't for you, that's absolutely fine. But if it is, I hope that this channel is the start of you finding a sense of belonging and shared respect of what it is you really belong to. All right. So this was the first video of this channel. If you still have some doubts about if this is you, this experience interpretation type of artist, I've tried to provide a more in-depth questionnaire linked below. I'll also try to provide some details, maybe of a Discord or something. I want to have kind of like an open office hour every weekend, like every Sunday or something like that, for anyone who wants to drop in and ask questions about all this. I don't exactly know which way to go with that. Maybe YouTube Live or something. I don't know. I really don't know what's going to happen with all this, so I'm just finding it out as I go along. But if you decide this is for you, then I'll see you in the next video, which will probably go over more details about this inner landscape of experience, because I believe that's the sort of day one of art, of this type of art school. Okay, so hopefully see you there.